Welcome to Empowering Pastors and Leaders. Today we are going to cover a topic that is, I believe, very helpful and it helps bring awareness. Now we have Bible college students that are here, and I need you to understand that right off the bat, there is no way you're going to know every detail of your call. I remember when I was in Bible school, I believed I was going to be an evangelist and knew that I would never be a pastor. Never. That was never going to occur. And then after 26 years of just pastoring this church, never mind 5 years of, so I've been pastoring now for over 29 years as a senior pastor. And I just knew I wasn't called a senior pastor. Just the way it is. So I do need to make sure you grasp as we're going to cover the topic today, and those that are watching online, whether you're a marketplace minister or called into ministry, you're not going to know all the details. But yet there are certain things that you have to have confidence in and you must be convinced about. One of the most important things that I do when I coach pastors, and what happens is pastors call me when they're stuck in a number at their church or not sure where they are in ministry, in their calling. They'll call me and they'll hire me, and I'll come and work with them and work with their church, work with their staff, coach with them. I ask one question initially, and I believe this is always the one question that determines how far I'm going to be able to help them. And this is the question. Did God call you to this ministry or business? As simple as that question is, it is a determination on whether or not I can help them or not. Why? Because until you are convinced, then you will always vacillate. Until you know in your heart of hearts your call, then you are always going to be in and out. You are never going to be stable. So when I remember asking this one pastor, I said, "Are you called to this church?" He said, "Yes, I was. God called me here." I said, "Did he tell you to leave?" "No, but." I don't care what your but is. Are you called? See, the difference between making it through a situation and difficulties is whether or not you are going to be convinced about where and what you're supposed to be doing. So as a Bible school student, I knew I was called. There was no question in my heart. I knew I was called. And I was convinced about my calling. I thought I was convinced about my location. Well, let me tell you. Now, as life continues to mature, you'll find that your location might shift. Pastor Sanjil, Pakistan, his location has shifted. Now he's in America, but his calling has not. So the issue is not God here. The issue is us on whether or not we are actually truly convinced and confident about that we are called into the ministry, or we are called into a business in marketplace ministry. One way or the other, that is going to determine whether you're going to have longevity or you're just going to be a short-termer. And the problem with short-termers is they never seem stable. And that is an issue. Right now in the American church, this is an issue because the average pastor, senior pastor, only stays in a location for 4 years. They say unless you're there 5 years, you haven't even started touching the community. The average youth pastor now is under a year. Which means what? It means the kids start getting settled in your leadership, and now you turn around and bug out and create instability all over again. Worship pastors are actually about the same timetable or a little bit less than youth pastors. So a congregation, a worship pastors, really, they're in front of the congregation half of a church service. They're showing their presence, and then they're gone again. The enemy loves to keep instability. He loves it when we're not convinced. He loves it when we're always topsy-turvy, rocking the boat. And there needs to be a time again in the American church where we are stable. Because people look at stability. I was talking to Pastor Jacob yesterday, and if I have a spoon, I would use my spoon. But ministry is a lot like this. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Actual ministry is quite boring. But constant pressure, consistency being everything, if that is water coming upon a rock, it will soon, actually, maybe not as soon as we want, but start creating erosion. It's the consistency that does that. But you will never be consistent until you're convinced. So we start looking at this, we've got to ask ourselves some basic questions. Without confidence, there is no way for you to sell the vision. People buy you before they buy your vision. So if you are not confident in your calling, if you are not confident even in location, then there's no way anybody's going to buy into your vision. They're not going to trust you. Leadership has a demand on trust. And so, as boring as that might be, there is a trust that when everything is completed, you're still there. Without that, people will only trust you to your confidence level. Now, when you look at this, and we look at it biblically, Abram had a visitation from God. He was confident on his call, but not confident in his location. When you first start out, the very first level that you have to have is your confidence in your call. What has God called you to do? Now listen, I want to go right back to the beginning of my experience. I was called to be an evangelist. Not really. That's what I thought it was at the beginning. I'm not talking about specificity altogether. I'm talking about in your heart of hearts, you know God has called you. God has his finger on your life. You have divine purpose, and God has put a call of God in your life of the fivefold ministry gifts. When you understand that, you might not understand all the details, and realistically, they unfold differently many times in our anticipation. But you have a confidence that you know that you cannot escape. Paul said it best, "Woe to me if I preach not the gospel." He was convinced on his calling. Even before he was born again, he was convinced in his calling because he joined the Pharisees. Little did he know that he would spend 3 years in the desert alone with Jesus. Little did he know that Christians would be afraid of him. Little did he know that he'd be writing 13 books of the Bible. But what solidified him was his confidence in the call. The enemy is depending upon your lack of confidence in your call. If he can get you to question your call, then nothing else has stability in your life. That's why I asked that question right out of the gate. Are you called? Did God call you here? Because if they can't answer yes, then where am I taking them? On another emotional experience or destination? Well, what happens if they don't like that destination? Then they leave that destination. What happens if they like making donuts, but that's not their call, so they start making donuts, but now they want to make cookies? no stability. No stability. Are you called? Does God have a call on your life? Do you know the divine direction or the purpose of your heart? See, Abram knew his call. He knew the caller, wasn't sure of the destination. In fact, God didn't want to give him the destination. He said, go. That's where, when you're confident in your call and you know the caller, you can walk by faith and not by sight. You'll know you'll get there. You just don't know where the there is. So my anticipation of not being a pastor and being an evangelist, I was quite upset when I had to take a youth pastorate. Because to me, that didn't make sense. I should be out preaching from church to church. The world needs me. But what people don't understand was God, before I went on the road as a full-time evangelist, he needed to change me. I was convinced about my call. I knew that I had a call of God in my life. My anticipated destination was not where I ended up. I ended up pastoring. And what that taught me was, I don't believe you can be a great evangelist without being a pastor first. And I don't believe you can be a pastor well unless you've touched the evangelistic field. There has to be a balance in the understanding of the fivefold ministry gifts. And if we just post our destination without allowing God to bring us there, then we might end up in the wrong country. But the base is, are you called there? Are you called? Do you know that you're called? Do you know that God has his finger on you? Do you know that the Lord has set you aside? Because when you don't know that, when the trouble comes, and baby, it comes. How about Joseph? God started giving him visions, dreams. He was foolish to tell his brothers. Then he told his dad about the dreams. Well, his anticipation was he was going to save his family while he was there. He was convinced about his call, but wasn't sure of his destination. So now he gets sold. His brothers turn on him. He's now sold. He's in Potiphar's house. Gets lied about. False accusation. Gets put in prison. Gets forgotten in jail. Years go by. Then gets remembered. Watch. He did not lose faith because he knew his call. He didn't understand his destination, but he had a confidence in his call. Can you imagine if he didn't? He'd have given up when his brothers turned on him. If not there, he'd have given up when he was put in prison. If not, he'd have given up because he felt forgotten. That call is so important in your life. Knowing you're called is so important. It is going to stabilize you. It is going to strengthen you. How many people walk away from the ministry, walk away from their marketplace ministry because they question their call? You must be convinced. How about Nehemiah? Nehemiah not only knew his call, but he knew his destination. He knew he was called by God, and he knew the call and destination was to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem. And you would think that if you know your call, and now you know your direction, and you know your location, that everything is beautiful. Oh no. This is why if he did not know his call, and he did not know his destination, when the false accusations came, when they tried to accuse him, when they tried to pull him off the wall, they would have succeeded. When they threatened him, he would have bowed. But he didn't bow not because the opportunity wasn't there, but because he was convinced about his calling and he was convinced about his destination. And I love what he said. He said he would not come off the wall and deal with their foolishness. How about Jesus? At the age of 12, he was convinced about his call. Don't you know I'm about my Father's business? Now, I don't know if Jesus knew all the details. He would have had to have great word of knowledge, because remember, he gave up all of his heavenly glory to come down here and to live as a man. It wasn't him stepping into ministry until the Holy Spirit came upon him in Mark chapter 1. And then as the Spirit came upon him, he had the Spirit without measure. Then he stepped into ministry. It wasn't before then. Jesus, though, had to know his call. And at 12, we recognize he knew his call. Now, did he know his destination was the cross? We don't know. But we know his destination or his purpose was the children of Israel. Because we know in the book of Matthew, chapter 15, the woman who was whose daughter was demon-possessed, and she came and touched Jesus, said, even the little dogs. He said, I wasn't sent but for the children of Israel. He knew his destination, his call. You must be convinced about your calling. Are you called? Are you called? If I can bring a question to your head, that is my advantage today. If I can make you question whether you're called or not, that is not seeding doubt. That is demanding you to get answers. Because you will never be satisfied if you're in a church doing ministry, but that's not your full-time call. You'll never be satisfied if you're making millions of dollars, but you're called into ministry. You must know your call. Pastor Dennis was telling me he grew up Catholic, and he was a true heathen, but he knew he was called at a young age. How old were you? At 9 years old, without any understanding, he knew that he had a call on his life. He went into the engineer world. He racked up mass amounts of debt. Was successful in engineering. But why is he not an engineer anymore? Because he was convinced about his call. That call cost him a lot of money. You will never truly sacrifice without being convinced about your call. Because what you're not convinced about, you will not sell yourself out towards. And Jesus sold himself out to the end, to the utmost, to the cross. Nehemiah sold himself out. Didn't matter, didn't care what people thought or said. He was going to finish the call of God on his life. Joseph did not give up, did not curl up in a ball in the back end of the cell and say, God must not be with me anymore. No, he fulfilled his call and his destination and saved the children of Israel so that we could have a Messiah called Jesus. Abram fulfilled his call. Therefore, he could have accomplished Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 and 3, where he will have descendants as the sand of the sea and the stars of the sky. Whoever blesses him will be blessed. Whoever curses him will be cursed. The completion of your call is impossible without the convincing of your call. We must be secure, because those who are not secure in the call will never allow other great people to serve with them. See, people that are not secure in who they are, not secure in their calling, not secure in their destination, are always striving to make sure that nobody is better than them. It's called a low self-esteem. But when you're called, it does not matter. Like Nehemiah, it does not matter what they say. Like Joseph, it does not matter the accusation. You are not going to be moved because there's a confidence inside it. There's a security inside of you. So how do you know? How do you know for sure? Well, I'm just not sure, Pastor. Well, I know I'm at Bible school. Well, I know I'm doing ministry, and I mean, I like it, but how do I know I'm called? Well, I just got news for you. This is not an occupation. This is a calling. And Jesus gave gifts. The apostle, the prophet, the pastor, teacher, and evangelist. You do not say, I want the vocation of ministry. It's not a vocation. It's a calling. That's why today everyone wants to be a pastor. If you really want to be a pastor, you really want to be in full-time ministry, you might not be called the full-time ministry because you don't understand what that actually means. It is not a bunch of accolades. In fact, this is what I love about our Bible school, and one of the niches that I believe we fulfill within our Bible schools that are across the United States is the practical application of what you're learning, because we want you to know before you leave here that it isn't a bunch of woohoos. That it isn't like, wow, everyone's just going to look at me and say, that's a pastor. That's a fivefold ministry gift person. No. We want you to have the reality of ministry where it's a little bit boring. Irritating. If you're not secure about your calling, you're going to need a new high. And this just ain't going to do it. So when you're convinced, it changes your entire viewpoint of life. But when you're not secure in your calling, then you're always going to be vacillating. How do you know? You got to pray. You got to get alone with the Lord. You've got to make sure that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt this is what the Lord has for you. When I stepped my foot on the ground of Zion Bible Institute back in 1983, wow, that's a long time ago, isn't it? I knew I was called. I did everything not to obey the call. But I knew when my foot hit the ground, I knew I was called. And when you know, you can run, baby, but you can't hide. But you've got to be convinced. You can get prophecies. Oh, the Lord would say unto thee that thou art called into the ministry. Hallelujah. And that God has separated you. He has set you apart for his usage. And the Lord will send thee, and he will take care of thee, and the Lord will be with thee always unto the end of the world. Hallelujah. That call is separating you. That's beautiful. You can get prophecies all you want, but until you're convinced, it's nice to have prophecies, but until you're convinced, you're not secure. You must get along with the Lord. You've got to know God. You've got to know his call. You've got to be convinced. You might not know destination, but you've got to know the call. Or you're going to constantly struggle. Because when I meet with these pastors, some of them, they were in ministry 10 years plus. They just weren't sure anymore. I got great news for you. God doesn't change his mind every decade. God don't even change his mind every 5 years. If a day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day, he's definitely not changing his mind every year. So if you're called now, you're always called. But if you're not convinced, then you'll never be stable. And in today's church, especially today's church, we need stable. The church is unstable. These new level leaders, that's you, need to be secure in your calling. Need to be secure in where God has taken you destination-wise. And if it's one stop here for a while, and then to another location after a while, that's fine too. I haven't been in the same location for my whole life. I was in Pennsylvania. I was an evangelist. I was a pastor in Elmira, youth pastor. Then I was a senior pastor in Massachusetts. Then I was a senior pastor in New York, Newfield. Then I was an evangelist for 3 years. And then I've been a senior pastor here for 26 years. Might not always been sure where I was going to end up, but I can never deny my call. Are you called? Are you convinced about your call? I know he is. How about you? Are you convinced about your call? Because when you're convinced, you become immovable. And it doesn't matter what they say about you, what they do to you, what they want to do to you. You will always remain stable in your life. And you need stability. Are you called? Are you called? Are you called? Is this where you're supposed to be? Well, I'm not sure. Well, get sure. Because when you're sure, you put your shoulder down and you lean into the moment. And as you're leaning into the moment, you get to grasp the information that's being deposited into your spirit so that you can be taken to the next leg and location, because your calling doesn't change. You're called, but your destination might. So be secure in your call, so your destinations are always going to be stable. Are you called? Is this where God wants you? Is this what God has for you? And once you've determined yes, stop allowing your brain to question you. Abram heard from God. Nehemiah heard from God. Joseph heard from God. Jesus heard from his Father. Have you heard from God? Or are you just planning your own destination? And if you do, you'll always be unstable. Because this is not about happiness. This is not about perfection. This is not even about the world peace. This is about, is this what God has for me? And is this where God has me? And if it is, then you're stable. If not, you'll never be able to sell your vision. No one will ever follow you in long lengths. It will always be short bursts. Why? Because when you show your instability, they no longer can trust your leadership and they walk away. Leaders must be stable. Leaders must be convinced. So here's your question. Are you convinced? Here's your homework. Here's your homework. What do you mean homework? You don't do your homework, well, you owe me $25. Some of you owe me $25. You didn't do your last homework. Thank you. My Cash App is Pastor Spencer. I'm going on vacation, so I don't mind receiving. So if you did not do your last homework, which is about 3 weeks ago, I feel the will of God to receive it today. Here's your homework for today. You need to send it to Pastor Spencer at iCloud.com. Here it is. Ready? Am I called? Yes or no? I want you to tell me whether you're called or not. And that's as simple as it is. Yes or no? Send it to that location. You'd be wise to do that now. That way you won't forget. But if you do forget, I'm thankful as well. I know that you're online, and I know that you've watched this, and I know that I don't know you've watched this, but I still hold you accountable. Are you called, yes or no? Send it to Pastor Spencer at iCloud.com. Thank you very much for watching, and have an awesome day.
Thank you for tuning in to Empowering Pastors and Leaders with Dr. Micheal Spencer. If you're looking for helpful, life-changing, and empowering resources, Dr. Micheal Spencer's books are available here. Just click on the link below and get your copies today. Don't wait. These resources will bring about the change and success you've been looking for. If you'd like to know more about empowering pastors and leaders, please visit michealspencerministries.com. Also, if you'd like to become a partner with Empowering Pastors and Leaders, sign up online for the opportunity to do so. Thank you in advance for your financial support to help us reach into the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and Africa, and the different parts of the world. Empowering Pastors and Leaders will equip you to transform your personal life, ministry, or business to become the best leader God designed for you to be. Invest in yourself today and be the most effective leader you've ever been.